Hi there, I'm Beth. Today I'll be showing you how to make this Blythe Doll shirt dress. I was commissioned to design this sewing pattern and was really pleased with how it came out. I've made a few dresses with this pattern now. Here's one using a lightweight ditzy floral print. I think it looks so good layered with underskirts and a belt at the waist. You'll find the pattern available on my website as a digital downloadable PDF in both A4 and US letter size. Print and cut out your template pieces, and I recommend using a lightweight cotton. I have a dark blue here, and I'll be sewing with white thread so you can see my seams clearly. For the front bodice, you can see how I cut the template to be able to mark the darts onto the back of the fabric. Before sewing, I will apply fray check to all my edges, then let everything fully dry. We'll start assembly with the bodice. I mark the point of the dart, fold and pin through the line on both sides. Lay the pins flat and sew from the wide end towards the tip, with reverse stitches at each end. Once both darts are sewn, align the shoulder seams like so, with right sides facing and pin. The seam allowance for this pattern is 5 mm throughout. Sew both shoulder seams, then press open the seam allowance. Press the darts away from the front centre. While the iron's hot, I like to press the centre line of the collar piece. Fold it back against the crease. Pin and sew each side seam. Trim the corners, then turn right side out. Before inserting the collar, make small snips into the seam allowance where there are curves. Fold, then pin the centre of the collar. Then align with the right side of the centre back. Pin outward from the centre, trying to avoid tucks in the bodice. Once the collar is pinned, fold in the facing pieces so they overlap the collar. Use the notch marked on the template as the folding point. Now sew along this seam, joining all the layers. Take your time and try to flatten out the bodice as you sew. Lift the foot and reposition the fabric as you go. Trim the corners and flip right side out to check for tucks. I have a little one here, so I turn it back round, snip the thread and smooth out that little section. Then I re-stitch it and check again. that fixed it nicely. Your collar should look like this, with the points pushed out. And when curled round the neck, the collar and bodice should be smooth. Before inserting the sleeves, I like to run a temporary stitch over the facing under the collar here. We will be top stitching here later, and I find this helps hold the shape until then. This is just a running stitch, no knots, just back stitched at either end, and in a contrasting colour since it'll be unpicked later. Before inserting the sleeves, I fold and pin the centre point of the shoulder here. I align and pin the side that'll go through the machine first, with the sleeve sitting on top. Right sides facing in. Reverse stitch to secure, then carefully align the edges together, just a couple stitches at a time. With the needle down, lift the foot and reposition frequently. The pin helps me ensure I have the pieces lined up right. It should meet the shoulder seam at the halfway point. Reverse stitch at the end and repeat for the second sleeve. Next, transfer the edge markings from the template to the right side of the sleeves. Fold the hem to meet the lower markings and finger press, then fold up again to the second markings and pin. Once closed, this will give us the turned cuff. Repeat for the other sleeve. And press both sleeves. Close the bodice sides by folding right sides in. Pin and sew from cuff to the bodice waist. Snip the seam allowance at the armpit to help ease it when turning through. Turn through both sleeves and test fit the bodice. Next, we join the skirt at the side seams. Right sides in. There's a slight curve at the top. Snip the seam allowance here. Open the seam allowance and press. Opening out the facing on the bodice, align right sides in with the skirt, like so. Both sets of side seams should match up. Pin together well and sew the waist seam. I have a tiny tuck again in the centre back, but it doesn't bother me. So next I fold the seam allowance up towards the bodice and top stitch close to the previous seam. Using the notch marked on the template, fold the lower skirt hem facing with right sides facing and pin. Repeat for the other side. Then sew each facing piece with a 5mm seam allowance. Snip the corners and turn right side out. Next, we'll press the skirt hem and the front seams. Curved hems are tricky. I turn and press a little at a time, folding at the joins, then working inward. Now we top stitch all around the edges of the dress and under the collar where we basted before. Sew the hem carefully, lifting the foot often to readjust. I only used white thread for visibility, but actually it looks quite nice like this. I unpick the orange basting thread. Next we'll make the faux pockets. Glue this tiny piece to cardboard and then you can use it to help iron in the seam allowances. Be careful not to burn your fingers though, it's fiddly. Once my edges are pressed in, I glue them in place. Originally, I just glued the pocket in place, then stitched on a bead to look like a button closure. but with this nice contrast stitching, I thought I'd go extra and hand stitched round the pocket edges first. I love how they turned out. I apply a little fabric glue and pop the dress on my model to help position both pockets evenly. Now choose some tiny buttons, beads or decorations to add as faux fastenings. I'll be adding fine doll scale Velcro as my closure. I'll put the link to mine in the description. It's possible to sew in loops and use real buttons to close the dress instead though. I opted for these self-adhesive sparkly gems. If any fall off, I'll reattach them with glue. They add a pretty finishing touch to this dress. For the Velcro closure, I glued on the soft fabric side and stitched on the rough plastic side facing away from the doll. Depending on your fabric choice, you might want to add a belt. On this lighter blue dress here, I think it really suited the black belt I made for it. I did try a belt on today's dress, but with the contrasting stitching, I prefer it without. Well, that's the dress finished. I hope you've had fun watching or sewing along. Please let me know what you think of it in the comments. You'll find the link to the pattern in the description, and when you make your own, please tag me and use the hashtag #BethRamsdenCrafts to share your pictures on Instagram. I'd love to feature you in an upcoming video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!